And so we were kind of getting aggravated with each other. But because we were at someone else's house, we had to argue. And so and then we started to push each other and shove each other. And all of this had to be done quietly. And then finally, as we were fighting with each other and just kind of like kicking each other, that we grabbed each other's arms and we started to drive our nails into the arms and scratch each other. And then the other, and we both were going, because we couldn't let anybody hear us. And even now, it's just now slightly going away, those scars from all those years ago. Sibling rivalry, sibling fighting. Now, siblings started fighting ever since the first siblings. And we read about the very first siblings in the sons of Adam in Genesis chapter 4. Here in Genesis chapter 4, page 3, it says this here. On page 3 is where it starts off this chapter. It says, now the man had relations with his wife Eve. The man had relations with his wife Eve. Now remember, Eve meant living or life. Now, but it mentions that there were relations, otherwise known as this word, yada, which is translated many times in Bibles as knew. He knew her. Some translations would say, and the man knew his wife Eve. The word yada means to know. Here is translated relations. It's trying to give, because to know someone was a euphemism for sexual relationships. And I remember when I read this as a kid, I was like, wait a minute. Why are they being so PG-13 with this? Why are they being so G-rated? So why don't they just say that they slept together? Why do they say, oh, he knew her, right? That kind of confused me as a kid. Well, here it actually does mean to know. I thought it was just the King James version, just trying to be like all like kosher and stuff. But it actually means to know. In fact, some of you guys are probably Star Wars fans, and if you remember that little tiny green guy, Yoda, right? Sounding like Grover for some reason from Sesame Street, because the same voice actor, Jim Henson, and Yoda would be like, think I do. And he would talk in his backwards way, and his name actually does mean, the reason why George Lucas named him Yoda was because of the fact that it was like a man with great knowledge. Well, the origin of that, Yoda, comes from the Hebrew word yada, which is to know. And so what we're seeing here is that the Bible describes sex as knowing. In other words, having sex with someone isn't something that's just crude or just something that is just merely physical. There is an intimacy there of knowing each other. In today's society, people have sex all the time and they have no clue. They're done having sex and they're putting back on the clothes and being like, by the way, what's your name? They don't know each other. But in the Bible, the phrase, the word for sex was yada, to know. By the way, that was the same word that was used to describe the tree of yada, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's why some weird people think that the tree of knowledge of good and evil meant that Adam and Eve committed sex and therefore the fall of man. That is a very twisted, inaccurate view of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It was a literal fruit, but the same word, yada, knowledge, in other words, an intimacy, getting to know each other, is the word that's used for sex. Now, the tree of knowledge, as we covered last week, it lets you know that there is a knowledge, there's an intimacy, there is an experience with not just good, but now also with evil. Continuing on here, it says, now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. Cain. What is up with that? Cain. Oh, I don't have it here, unfortunately. But the word Cain literally means to acquire. To acquire. Now remember, Eve literally just had an experience where she heard from God that there would come from her seed, basically the Messiah. From her descendants, from her seed would come one that would crush the head of the serpent. And so they named their first son Cain, acquire, because they felt like the promise has been received. That's going to end ironically. It says they gave birth to Cain, and she said, I have gotten, or I have acquired a man-child with the help of the Lord. So she felt like she received, acquired, she had gotten something from God. She felt like this was the fulfillment of the prophecy of their salvation. Sorry to tell you, Eve and Adam, it's going to take a lot longer than just the birth of one child to remedy this sin problem. Again, she gave birth to her brother Abel, or Habel. And Habel was the keeper of flocks. Now, Habel, what does Habel mean? Habel is the same word that you find in the book of Ecclesiastes. Remember when they said vanity, oh vanity, all is vanity and vexation of spirit, or chasing the wind? The word Habel is the word for breath. Breath, which is, in Ecclesiastes, is used to describe vanity or pointlessness. For Adam and Eve, they had already acquired Cain. Therefore, Habel, this is pointless. This is vanity. This is like breath. You don't even see it, it's gone. They felt it was unnecessary to have Abel because they already had Cain. They already acquired the blessing of the Lord. What an irony. That the one that they felt was just merely as invisible as breath turns out to be the one, as we're going to see later, as one faithful to God. And the one that they felt was acquired from God was the one that they felt was one that ended up being not so much turning out to be a blessing. It says, again, she gave birth to his brother Abel, or Habel. And Habel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. They both had jobs. They both had responsibilities. Habel dealt with the flocks. Cain, or Cain, better pronounced, is the one that dealt with the produce. Tiller of the ground. Now, remember what ground is in Hebrew? What is the Hebrew word for ground? It's Adamah. Remember, Adam came from Adamah. So the Hebrew word for ground is Adamah. And so they gave Cain the real important job. After my own name's sake, you're going to be the tiller of the Adamah. So it came about in the course of time. So it wasn't right away. This is something that came eventually. It came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Now, the first time that there was an offering, or a sacrifice, I should say, was during the Garden of Eden. We covered that last week. Remember how they were supposed to die? But they didn't die because an animal died instead. When they took that skin off that animal to clothe Adam and Eve, that was taken from animal. Animal died. But now, over the course of time, Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. Now, obviously, Adam and Eve must have committed more sin between back then and now. That's why I didn't say right away. It says in the course of time. Now, they obviously made more sacrifices. Cain and Abel clearly saw those sacrifices being made. But now, Cain brings something different. He brings fruit from the ground. Abel, on his part, also brought of the firstlings of his flock and of the fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. God had greater regard. God had a respect for Abel and what he gave. The firstlings, in other words, the first animals that were coming about. That was something typical starting from here. We start reading that from here, where they would give the first of the animals. Now, Cain's offering, it says, but for Cain and for his offering, he had no regard. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. Cain was very upset because his offering of fruit was rejected. Now, what's interesting, because later on in the Old Testament, people did offer fruit. They would give a first fruit offering. So it's a little strange when you know what later on is going to come about. It's strange that Cain's offering here is rejected. After all, this is what Cain worked on. He worked on the ground. This was something you would say was that he gave probably the best of his fruits. This is what I have to offer. I don't tend to animals. I take care of the garden. Why can't I offer you this? And a lot of times people today kind of fall into the similar mentality. I'm offering God what I can. I'm offering God my best. I hear it all the time in church. People say, well, give God your best. Showcase your best. God is not asking for your best. He's asking for something specific. Just because it's your best doesn't mean that's what God wants. See, we are not the ones that make up the rules. God is the one that makes up the rules. But all the time, people would come to me and they would tell me, but that's not the best. Did God ask you for that? See, when we make up rules based on what we view to be the best, we are coming up with our own standard. Cain came up with his own standard. But you say, Wayne, but why is it that later on they would offer fruits? I want to be clear about something, that fruits was something that they would give. They would give to God later on. However, it is clear from the context of this story that God was looking for a sacrifice. And fruits, while you can give a fruit to a priest, and you can offer a fruit to God in thanksgiving, you do not use fruit to represent a sacrifice, because when you cut a fruit, there is no blood. Blood had to be present to represent the blood of the Messiah to come. And so while Cain offered something to God, it wasn't what God was asking for. So it says, but for Cain and his offering, he had no regard. So Cain became very angry and his countenance fell. So the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? Why are you angry, Cain? And why has your countenance fallen? Why do you look so down? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? See, God is not coming down hard on Cain here. He's asking him, why are you angry? We see that pattern with God, that when God showed up in the Garden of Eden, the Garden of Pleasure, that he started off with a question. Where are you? Who told you you were naked, right? Questions. And so God speaks to Cain, although he's all-knowing, he speaks to Cain, why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? Wouldn't you feel better if you do the right thing? So God is giving him a chance here. I want something different than the fruit. And all he had to do was be like, okay, I got it. I'm sorry. And he'd go and maybe make a trade of fruit with his brother Abel for an animal and make a sacrifice for an animal. But he doesn't do that. It says, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Now, I want to be clear. It says sin is crouching at the door. It didn't say sin was in the house yet. Because, you could look at this situation and be like, hey. You haven't been overcome by sin yet. What Cain did wasn't accepted by God. But God is not holding this against him. He didn't regard it, but he's not holding it against him. His sin is crouching at the door if you do not do well. Sin is right outside. It is ready to pounce in at you. I'm telling you what to do to avoid sin. It says, if you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? If you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you. You must master it. Sin wants to take over your life. You have to master it. Oh, that is a message for us even today. Sin is crouching, ready to catch us like a lion. It is just waiting for an opportunity. And sometimes we make mistakes. But if you continue in the pattern, it's no longer a mistake. It is now intentionality, is rebellion. God is giving Cain an opportunity. He says, listen, it desires to get you, but you got to master it. You can't let sin control you. You have to have control over the sin. In other words, you need to have self-control. You need to not allow it to defeat you. You need to have the victory over sin. Verse 8, Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about. So Cain tells him. It says, Cain told his brother Abel. He tells him about what happened. He talks to him. And it says, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against his brother against Abel his brother, and killed him, or slew him, or slaughtered him. After speaking to Abel, whether it was his intention or not, maybe he was trying to just have a conversation, but it says it came about that when they ended up in the field, something came over Cain. He did not have the victory over sin, and Cain killed Abel. This is the first murder in the Bible. God never vocalized, thou shalt not kill. Wasn't needed to be said because Adam and Eve had no clue what killing was. But now we see that there is a murder. It was a given you don't kill each other. But now we read the very first murder to take place. And it was a brother against brother. He killed him. And the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? Again, starting off with a question. Where is Abel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Woo, you defensive, Cain. I don't know. Am I supposed to take care of my brother? I mean, Cain is the oldest, isn't he? He said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. What a statement. This right here is hyperbole. Anthropomorphism. In other words, is where you take an inanimate object and you give it human-like characteristics. God is speaking in poetry language. It wasn't like the blood grew a mouth and started speaking. He's poetically saying, this blood is talking to me. This blood is telling a story. This blood is crying out to me from the ground. Now you are cursed from the ground. Now this is interesting because earlier last week we covered how Adam, when God spoke to Adam after sin, God said, cursed is the ground. God did not say cursed is you, he said cursed is the ground. But with Cain, it says, cursed is you. You are cursed from the ground. God didn't curse Adam, God cursed Adamah, the ground. But now, God curses Cain from the ground. It's like things are getting worse. The Lord said, now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. You know what's ironic? Cain, instead of killing and slaying an animal, he shed the blood of his brother. Rather than negotiating and trying to get an animal to slice, he cuts down his brother. And the brother's blood, Abel, pours onto the ground, and the ground sucks it up. Oh, while the blood might be in the ground, I can hear the blood's cry. Your brother's blood cries out from the ground, which has been opened to receive the blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. See, even though the ground was cursed for Adam, there was still a level of usability. While there were thorns, they were still able to reap the crops. But as for Cain now, it's not going to be so easy. It wasn't already that easy anymore. Adam had to sweat when working the ground, but now it's going to get worse for Cain. It says, the curse is the ground. Cursed are you from the ground, which is open its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You know, you used to be good at this, but now the crops are not going to grow as strong. It's not going to grow as healthy. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. You're going to be a vagabond, a wanderer. Verse 12, when you cultivate the ground, it will no longer yield its strength to you. You will be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. This is too hard. He was disappointed. He felt like this was wrong. He felt like this was unfair. It's not right that I now have to have a hard time growing crops. What? Do you know what you just did? You just killed your brother. Your brother can't do anything now. Now, by the way, again, the first page of the Bible sets a foundation. Notice how God says your brother's blood cries out from the ground. It doesn't say your brother is talking to me up here in heaven, does he? It doesn't say if Abel, when he died, went to heaven, like many Christians believe, then God would have said, Abel told me what you did. What God says is that your brother's blood cries from the ground. When people die, they go to the ground. But now Cain is feeling like, this is not right. This is too hard for me. What do you mean I have to, that my crops are not going to be blessed anymore and it's not going to come in strength? What do you mean? My punishment is too great for me. So the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain. God knew what he was talking about. God knew that the reason why he felt like the punishment was too great was because he felt like by him being cursed by God, others will look at him and be like, wait a minute, this guy did something wrong in the eyes of God. You killed our brother. We're going to take you out. By the way, by this point, there are other brothers. I know it makes it seem like there's only like 4 people on the earth by this point, but there are clearly more. That's why God is saying, it says, so the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. Remember, 7 is God's number, a perfect number. God's saying, I'm going to bring a perfect curse on them. a complete curse on them. Whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, so that no one finding him would slay him. God puts a sign on Cain, saying, don't kill him, or else you're going to be cursed even more. If you don't, so Cain's like, my punishment is too bad. He says, well, don't worry, Cain. If anybody tries to kill you, they're going to get cursed 7 times more than you. What God is doing here is that he's making it clear. Listen. Just because he did something wrong doesn't give people permission to do wrong to the person who did wrong. Or else it's gonna spiral out of control. Somebody kills somebody, somebody's gonna kill him, somebody's gonna kill that person for killing him. It's like, whoa, let's just stop this right now. Killing is wrong. So if somebody kills Cain, cursed is the person who kills Cain. In fact, you're cursed even more. Some people think it's okay to kill a murderer. Some people think it's okay to kill someone if they deserve it. Even a murderer, like Cain, the first murderer, God puts a sign of protection on him. Wow. That shows the mercy of God, even for the first murderer. Whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, so that no one finding him would slay him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Remember, east, if you're coming from the east, that's good. If you're going further east, that's bad. He's getting further away from the Garden of Eden. Now, this word here, Nod, comes from the word Nod in Hebrew, which means wandering. And so remember we just read that Cain was going to be a wanderer. And so he settles in the land of wandering, in the nomad land. When we don't do right in the eyes of God, when we're wrong, when we rebel against God, it leads us to wandering. In other words, being lost. This is the first person in the Bible mentioned to be a wanderer or to be lost. Wow. But then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of wandering, east of Eden. Cain had relations. Yada, his wife, had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. Wait a minute. Enoch? That's an interesting name. Here comes the word Enoch. The word Enoch means dedicated or inaugurate. This was the first child of Cain, Enoch. And it says he gave birth to Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. This is the origin of the very first city on planet Earth. We live in New York City, but way before New York City, way before Babylon, there was the city of Enoch, which means dedicated. After all, the city was dedicated to his son. Named after his son. Dedicate, inaugurate. Here is the first city, and let me tell you that this first city sets off a trend in the Bible where 90% of the cities that are mentioned are negative. After all, the first city comes from Cain. Not a good origin story for cities. Cain names this city Enoch. Names the city Enoch. And by the way, city here comes from the word Ir, which means guarded place. It's a place of excitement being stirred up. So this safe area, this guarded area. Now, it's interesting he builds a city to be guarded. Guarded from what? After all, everybody here is family. But Cain has now been an outcast, and he feels like he needs to protect himself. Even though God already put a protection sign on him, he clearly doesn't believe or fully trust God. And so he builds a fortified, guarded place, in other words, called a city, because he's trying to protect himself. And this place is known as a place of excitement being stirred. In other words, this is a place with a lot of bustle, a lot of movement, a lot of excitement. He calls it Enoch. He calls it dedicated. Continuing on, Cain had relations with his wife and conceived and gave birth to Enoch, and he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch after the name of his son. Now, Enoch was born Irad. Irad. All right, let's look at this word here. Get the clicker to work again. Folks. Thank you. Arad, which it means, the root word comes from the root word wild. Uh-oh. Things are getting bad. Cain's grandson is wild. That's what it means. Arad. So continuing on, it says, now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael. Mehujael means blotted out by God. Now it's even worse. Blotted out by God. Imagine calling your child erased by God. Why would you even name your child that? Blotted out by God, erased by God. Clearly at this point, the lineage of Cain feels like them and God, we have nothing to do with each other. It says here, Irad became the father of Mehujael, blotted out by God. And Mehujael became the father of Lamech. I skipped the name. Yeah, Mahajiel. And Mahajiel became the father of Methusiel. Methusiel means man who is of God. Now that's weird. That's ironic. We went from blotted out by God and then man who is of God. Those are complete opposite. Now what's interesting here is that how many generations is this from Cain? Right? You have Cain, you have Enoch, right? You have Irad, and you have Mehujael, and then Mehujael, and then Methusiel, right? So Methusiel is which generation later? All right, let's try it again. You had Cain, right? Cain had a son named Enoch. Enoch had a son, Irad. Irad had a son, Mehujael. And Mehujael, after Mehujael comes Methusiel. What generation are we up to? We're up to the fifth generation. The fifth generation. It's interesting when God says the sins of the father last from the third and fourth generation. You catch that? Remember how in the Ten Commandments it says the sins of the father pass on from the third and fourth generation? Now that we get to the fifth generation, it's almost like God gives an opportunity for a reset. Man who is of God. Just because you come from a bad lineage doesn't mean that you have to follow that lineage. Now, the reason why sin passes on from the third and fourth generation, people are not doomed to follow their parents, but chances are people are a product of their environment. You're growing up in this city filled with people who are not following God. Chances are you're not going to follow God. Sin passes to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me. And so sin, it has a root in people. And so, in other words, people follow in their parents' footsteps, even to the third and fourth generation. But now, with this new generation, Methusiel is called, it has the name man who is of God. In other words, an opportunity to be different, an opportunity to live according to God. Now, some people might be stopping and be like, wait a minute. Who on earth did Cain marry? Who did he end up having relations with? Who did he know? Well, the Bible is not being comprehensive of all the people that are born. It's just mentioning the sons of Adam or the descendants of Adam. Clearly, Adam had daughters, and those daughters got together with their brothers. There was nobody else, and then they had children. But here, what I want to point out is just because my dad was a sinner, my grandfather was a sinner, my great-grandfather was a sinner, just because you come from a long line of rebellion against God, you can be like Methuselah and break the chain. Here it says this, continuing on. It says, and Methuselah became the father of Lamech. Lamech. Now, Lamech here means powerful. All right? Let's hear about Lamech. Lamech took to himself 2 wives. Oh, we're back to the sin. That didn't last too long, the whole positive thing, right? Cain, Enoch, and all of them. And then Methuselah, oh, maybe there's hope, maybe there's a glimmer of hope. We're back to evil. This is the first person to practice polygamy in the Bible. The first person says, you know what? Why do I need to stick with one? Why don't I have 2? He has 2 wives. The name of one was Ada. Ada. Ada means ornament. And the name of the other, Zillah. Zillah means shade. These are beautiful names. And they must have been very beautiful women. But God never, if you remember what we read in Genesis, Genesis chapter 2, it mentioned a man will leave his father and mother to cleave to his wife. Singular. It didn't say wives. Wife. And the two should become one flesh. Here, this man, Lamech, decides to go rogue and decides to take 2 wives, Madam Ornament and Madam Shade. And Ada gave birth to Jabal. Jabal. Jabal means stream of water. So, Ada gave birth to Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. Jubal means streams, very similar. That's why their name sounds similar. Stream of water, one is just stream. Jubal. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of those who play the lyre and pipe. Interesting. This is the first time we hear about music in the Bible. It's interesting how all these things have their history with Cain. City has its history with Cain. Music has its history with Cain. What's interesting about this, and I'm not saying these things are evil, but it has its origin with evil people. What's fascinating about this is how God takes things that have an origin with evil and evil people and and successfully changes the story of those. Now we read about music, and music is a beautiful thing. The lyre, kind of like a harp, David played the harp, the lyre. So these things, just because it has an evil origin, doesn't mean it has to stay evil. Some people today look at certain instruments and say, oh, that instrument is an evil instrument. And yeah, maybe it had an evil origin, but God can change the history and the momentum and the meaning of an instrument. Just like how the very first instruments were started off with the people of Cain. Music could have an evil origin, but God can change the story. Brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of those who play the lyre and pipe. In other words, his descendants became musicians. Jabal's descendants became those who took care of livestock. As for Zillah, remember he had 2 wives. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain. What? Tubal-Cain, which means raised like Cain. Why on earth would you want to make Cain your role model? This mom says, I'm going to name my son after Cain. Well, I want to raise him like Cain. Are you kidding me? This lineage is off the rails. Tubal-Cain, the forager of all implements of bronze and iron. So, had all these things that they were doing. This family, Tubal-Cain, they became people that dealt with metals, in other words. And the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Naamah, which means loveliness. This is the first sister to be mentioned, by the way. So, Tubal-Cain became the father of the tribe that dealt with metals. Sister's name is Loveliness. Verse 23, Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice. And you wives of Lamech, give heed to my speech. Now, by the way, do you notice how in your Bibles, all the other verses were kind of written in like regular blocks, right? Written in regular blocks. But here, it's written in a different way, right? You kind of see that it's kind of broken up. It's not like filling up the whole line. You see that? The reason why it's doing that is because that's how the Hebrew Bible is written. The Hebrew Bible is written in paragraphs, not in verses. But in moments like this, when it's dealing with poetry, it breaks up in lines. So if you were to get a hold of a Hebrew Bible, you will see that it's a bunch of paragraphs, but then it will break up in lines for areas that are designated to be poetry. Since we're talking about that, go back. Look at the first couple of pages. Where is the first poetry? Go back. See if you can find the first time that you see poetry in the Bible. Go back, go look. Look at the other pages. See what part doesn't look like a paragraph, it looks like poetry. Genesis 2, verses what? Verse what? 23. The first poetry in the Bible was where the man said, now this is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh, she shall be called woman, for she is taken out of man. It's poetry. There's a lot of wordplay there, right? Now, and then the next time you read poetry was where? 3, verse what? 14 onward, where you read about the curses. And now we're reading the next poetry, which similar to when Adam gave the first poetry where he spoke about his wife. Lamech speaks poetry and he's speaking to his wives. Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice. You wives of Lamech, give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me. Wait a minute, what? Lamech becomes the next murderer. I have killed a man for wounding me. Lamech got hurt. Probably got in a fight, or maybe somebody just punched him or something. But because he got wounded, he said, you know what? I'm going to kill you for hurting me. Punishment didn't fit the crime. Even somebody who killed someone, Cain, God did not want anyone to kill him. Lamech gets hurt and he decides to kill the man. For I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. What? This is a young guy. Because this young guy hit him, he killed him. Whoa. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, then Lamech 77-fold. I'm sorry, Lamech, it doesn't work that way. God made the pronouncement that anybody that messes with Cain will be cursed 7 times. You can't pronounce your own protection. If Cain was avenged sevenfold, then I should be avenged 77-fold. No, you don't get to make the rules. Interesting. Here we read the next murderer, a murderer polygamist. It is now getting worse. Yes. Well, remember at this point, because remember this is several generations later, by this point there have been many people that have been born. And so we've only been reading, for the most part, the main people that were born, right? It didn't mention about all the other siblings that were born. It would just say this person gave birth to that person gave birth to that person, but it doesn't mention all their other siblings. So clearly the world is getting populated right now. Verse 25, Adam had yada. Adam had relations, he knew his wife. Adam had relations with his wife again. Now remember, the Bible is not necessarily always going chronologically. It goes from general to more specific. It wasn't like Adam waited all these years all the way to Lamech that didn't have another child. and we're going to see that later when we read the chronology. But what it dealt with Cain, so it deals more with categories, right? So we talked about Cain. Now that we're done talking about Cain, let's go back to Adam, right? And sometimes we tell stories like that. We're telling a story, and then we kind of backtrack. Like, let me rewind and tell you something. Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth. Seth. Here's the name Seth. Seth, better pronounced as Sheth, or Shifput, is placed. Placed. The Seth, it says here, Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. God has Shifput. He has placed, he has put in place a new person, replacing Abel. All of a sudden, Abel no longer was breath. He was no longer vanity. He was no longer a waste of time. In fact, he was worthy to be replaced. Shifput. He is Sheth. God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. To Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Enosh. The word Enosh is mankind or mortal. It's interesting how this section ends by making it very clear that man is mortal. So I know that you might be thinking, like, what? I thought Adam was mankind. Well, this is Enosh. Enosh is a synonym, but more of an emphasis of mortality. Adam, when he was created, was not mortal. Enosh. To Seth, to him was also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. Through the line of Seth, because Cain wasn't following God, but through the line of Seth, they started to call upon God, call on the name of the Lord. Chapter 5 gets more specific. So let's back up again. Chapter 5, this is the book of the generations of Adam. So what we're going to cover here is the generations, the lineage of Adam. This is the book of the generations of Adam, in the day when God created man. Now, I want to point out something. Some of you guys probably have a King James version. How does that verse read? It's translated accurately here, but yeah, how does that verse, if you have a King James version, well, how does that verse, chapter 5, verse 1, how does it read? And then verse 2. And then it says, he named them what? He named them Adam. Now, I want you to point something here. And if you look here in your hardcover Bible, look at the footnote for man in verse 2. Literal translation, look, you see in your Bibles, on the bottom corner, the literal translation is Adam. Remember, the word man, when God created man, he created Adam. The word Adam means man or mankind. So, okay, look, this is the book of the generations of Adam. In the day when God created man or Adam, he created him in the likeness of God. He created them, male and female. He created them and named them man. Named them what? Man. And what is the literal Hebrew word for man? Adam. That's why in the King James Version it says he created male and female. He called them Adam. Notice how Adam didn't call his wife Eve until after the curses. Before the curses, her name was not Eve. Her name was man. Her name was Adam. Adam was married to Adam. They both had one name. I know that sounds weird to us, but they had one name. Why? Demonstrating the fact that the two were one. Adam and his wife shared one name. Talk about unity. Look, let me read it again in case you miss it. This is the book of the generation of Adam. In the day when God created man. Remember, the word man is Adam. He created him in the likeness of God. He created them, plural, male and female, and he blessed them and named them man. He named them both what? So both male and female were both called men. That's why last week I spent a lot of time emphasizing that the word Adam is not gender specific. It's not only dealing with males. The word man, kind of like mankind or human, if it helps you to understand, it makes it sound better for you, you could think of that they were both called human. Human. The idea of Adam was the name given to both of them. I love that imagery. I love that concept that the first couple had one name. Kind of like the image of God. All of the Godhead share one title, God. Both man and woman are one. They have one name. They were both called man, or Adam, if you want to use the literal Hebrew word. He created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them Adam in the day when they were created. When did he call them Adam? In the day they were created. So the first, and who called them Adam? God did. God named Eve. Before she was Eve, he called the woman Adam. So when he created the man, Adam. When he created the woman, Adam. You have the same name. You are one. Wow. And it wasn't until after the curse of sin, we read it last week, that Adam called his wife Eve. He gave her a new name. But it was supposed to be an encouragement because the word Eve means living. Because they had just received the promise of God that there would come from the line of Eve someone who would crush the serpent. It's like, wow, life is contained in you. So to encourage his wife, who was the first one to eat the fruit, he called her Eve. You are the mother of all living. In other words, you're going to be the mother of the Messiah, where life will be restored through you. So here, continuing on, verse 3, he created them male and female, and he blessed them and named them Adam in the day when they were created. When Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son and in his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. 130 years old. Time was different then. Remember, they had most likely eaten from the tree of lives. Now, I say lives because the literal translation of the tree of life is plural, the tree of lives. Because it wasn't like there was just one life. The tree of life was going to supply life for many people. The tree of lives. Well, Adam lived a long time, 130 years old, and he has this child, Seth. And he says that he was born in his image. Isn't that the same statement that was mentioned when God created man in his image? In the image of God, he created them, male and female. That same terminology is used now. It's saying that Seth is in his own likeness according to his image and named him Seth. Notice how it didn't say Cain was in his image. So it's clearly the terminology image or likeness is more than just physical. It's the idea of spiritual, emotional, and psychological. In other words, it's character. It's everything, the whole holistically. And so Seth was following in his dad's footsteps to be a man of God. Adam lived 130 years, and he became the father of a son and his own likeness, according to his image, and named him Seth. Then the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years. So 130 years, he gave birth to Seth, and then 800 years more If you put those together, how long did Adam live? 930, right? And he had other sons and daughters. You see, so to answer your question earlier, where all these other people come from, clearly Adam didn't just have 3 boys, right? He had other sons and daughters. But what Genesis is doing is highlighting the main characters. So it said he had other sons and daughters. Verse 5. Verse 5, it says, so all the days that Adam lived were 930 years. Oh, you guys did good math. So all the days of Adam that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. Ooh. Adam finally died. He didn't die the day that he ate the fruit, because God gave a promise that the Messiah would die. Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh. Now, we covered earlier about Enosh, right? Enosh, mankind or mortal. To simplify it, mortal. So Seth lived 800 years. So Seth lived 105 years and became the father of Enosh, mortal. Now, it's interesting how Seth names his son mortal. It is clear to Seth that humans are not everlasting. Humans are not immortal. So he names his son mortal. Then Seth lived 807 years, after he became the father of Enosh, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. Enosh lived 90 years and became the father of Canaan. Canaan, or spelt Canaan, depending on your translation, which means possession or living space. Like the land of Canaan, or Canaan, possession, living space. Enosh lived 90 years, and he became the father of Canaan. Then Enosh lived 850 years, and became the father of Canaan. After he became the father of Canaan. And he had other sons and daughters. Now, by the way, you see how specific and detailed the Bible is getting right now? And now a lot of people look at this and may find it boring, like, why are there so many names and numbers? I want to be clear about something. I think it's wonderful that the Bible is getting this detailed, because there are a lot of people that try to say that the book of Genesis is allegory. Well, what's the allegory of 800 years and 130 years and all that stuff? Why is it going so detailed about names and numbers? I remember one rabbi that was coming to the series that I was doing on Genesis, and he came to me and says, Wayne, I think Genesis is fictitious. I think it's an allegory. I think it's just all metaphor up until chapter 12. And you know what happens in chapter 12? That's when Abraham was born. Oh, so it's so convenient that once Abraham's story is told, all of a sudden now it's literal, because we're sons of Abraham. But everything before Abraham, that's all allegory. And I pointed him to this chapter, the chapter where it goes through the genealogy. Like, why would an allegory go so detailed, line by line, generation by generation, and tell you how long each generation lasts? How old was the dad when the son was born? How long did they live after the son was born? Clearly, only historical records go that in detail. I have faith, and I believe, and I know that the records of Genesis are not allegory, it is literal. It is trying to let you know very specifically how long the earth existed up until this point. It's letting you know it is a literal time frame. Continuing on here. So we read about Canaan, or Canaan. It says, Seth lived 807 years after he became the father of Enosh, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Seth were 912 years, and he died. And by the way, when I gave the explanation to the rabbi, he was stunned. He was like, whoa. You know what? A good point there. That's the power of the Bible. Not my words, but just showing him from Scripture. And this rabbi started to have a change of mind. And then it says here, verse 9, Enosh lived 90 years and became the father of Kenan. We read that already, all right? Enosh lived 850 years, and after he became the father of Kenan and other sons and daughters, so all the days of Enosh were 905 years, and he died. Verse 12, Kenan lived 70 years and became the father of Mahalalel. Mahalalel here means praise of God. This is already sounding better than Cain's lineage. Praise of God. Mahalalel. Then Canaan lived 840 years after he became the father of Mahalalel, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Canaan were 910 years, and he died. Mahalalel lived 65 years and became the father of Jared. Jared, which means descend or prostrate. Descend like going down, or prostrate, going flat. Jared. Humility, in other words. Then Mahalalel lived 830 years, and after he became the father of Jared, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Mahalalel were 895 years, and he died. Jared lived 162 years, and he became the father of Enoch. Wait a minute. Didn't we hear about Enoch earlier? Enoch, the first time we heard about Enoch, he was the son of who? He was Cain's son. There are two Enochs. If we had time, I would preach a sermon called The Two Enochs. The first Enoch, the first city was named after him. Now, this is a new Enoch, a dedicated, inaugurate. Again, God takes bad things and changes the story. The first child from a murderer, God takes that same name, and now it's part of the line of Seth. That is a metaphor if I ever heard it. It's a real story, but it tells wonderful stories for us. It lets you know that God can change the meaning of your name. God can change your trajectory. Just because others who have had your name have done horrible things, God can do something different in your life. And we'll look at what God is going to do in Enoch's life. It says here that Jared lived 800 years after he became the father of Enoch, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Jared were 962 years, and he died. Enoch lived 65 years and became the father of Methuselah. Methuselah means man of the weapon, or man of the sharp point. In other words, he was sharp. Man of the weapon, man of the sharp point. Methuselah. Then Enoch walked with God 300 years after he became the father of Methuselah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Enoch were 365 years. Now that's the shortest amount of years so far. Why? Verse 24 says, Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. It doesn't say that Enoch died like all the others. It says God took him. In other words, he was translated, whether it was by disappearing or by floating up, but he was taken from this earth. This man walked with God. What a strange contrast, difference from the other Enoch. That other Enoch was the son of Cain. But this son, the son of the prostrate, the humble one, this man was clearly dedicated in a different way. He was dedicated to the Lord. He walked with God. He became a man of God, and he's the first person to make it to heaven. If you have the theology that believes that Abel went to heaven, there would be no significance. If everybody went to heaven right away, then there's no deepness to the fact that Enoch is the first one to go to heaven. He walked with God, even though he had a name, even though he had the same name as the son of Cain. Don't let anybody tell you who you have to be. You could be also walk with God. Continuing on here. So Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Methuselah lived 187 years and became the father of Lamech. Wait a minute. We heard that name too. Lamech, meaning powerful. Who was Lamech? Who was Lamech in Cain's story? He was the guy with 2 wives, and he was the person who was the second murderer. Do you see what God is doing? God is rewriting the story. He had a different Enoch. He has a different Lamech. Look at it, what it says here. Lamech lived, so it says here, Methuselah lived 782 years after he became the father of Lamech, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Methuselah were 969 years, and he died. Methuselah lived the longest so far, ever. He's the longest living person. He lived longer than Adam himself. Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Okay, well, who is it? Lamech lived 182 years and became the father of a son. Now he called his name Noah. Genesis is doing this lineage in purpose because it's letting you know, first of all, the story of 2 different lines, and it's also letting you know that Noah is a literal descendant from Adam, and you can trace the chronology and timeline all the way to Noah. Lamech lived, now he called his name Noah. Now the word Noah means rest, or resting place. Resting place. More on that in a second. It says here, now he called his name Noah, saying, this one will give us rest from our work and from the toil of our hands arising from the ground, which the Lord has cursed. The earth is cursed, but God is going to give us rest. Lamech is prophesying that his son Noah God will give rest. This one will give us rest from our work, from the toil of our hands arising from the ground, which the Lord has cursed. The Lord cursed the ground, but God is going to give us rest through Noah. Lamech lived 595 years after he became the father of Noah, and he had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. What a number to end the sons of Adam. It ends with a very powerful number, 777. Revelation, the last book of the Bible, we talked about the number 666, but the first book of the Bible starts off with has the number 777. Lamech, he's a powerful person for the Lord. He prophesied the rest, and his name of his son means rest, and his number is the number of rest. Remember how on the 7th day of creation, God rested from all his work, which he had created and made? That's the number 7. Lamech lived 777 years. That is not a coincidence. Now, I want to be clear about something. The word Sabbath means rest. Shabbat means rest. But that rest means to stop, to cease from your work. But why does Noah mean rest? It's a different type of rest. The word Noah means rest as in relaxation. So Sabbath means stop, rest. Noah means relax, rest. Let's read it again. Now, he called his name Noah, saying, this one will give us rest, relaxation from our work, from the toil of our hands arising from the ground. We work so hard, but Noah will give us rest. And he had other sons and daughters. But from the toil of his hands arising from the ground, which the Lord has cursed. Then Lamech lived 595 years after he became the father of Noah and had other sons and daughters. So all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and he died. Noah was 500 years old, and Noah became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now I'm going to go more in detail about Noah and all these and 500 and all that stuff later in the next time we get together. But let's talk about Shem. Shem, name, literally means name. In fact, all the times that we read, and just a while ago when it said Lamech had a son, and he called his name Noah. He called his Shem Noah. That's the word. The word in Hebrew for name is Shem. Noah, are you not creative? You call it, what are you going to call your son? Name. What's the name of your name? Okay. By the way, Shem is not the firstborn. Later on, we'll get to the chapter where it mentions the order of Noah's sons, Japheth, Ham, Shem, right? We'll read about the order of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Was not the order that they show up. Japheth, Shem, and Ham, I believe was the order. So why is it mentioned in this order? Because God is not so much interested in birthrights. After all, if God was interested in birthrights, Cain would have the birthright. And you're going to see throughout Genesis that being the firstborn doesn't mean much to God. It mentions Shem first because of the order of relevance. Shem is mentioned, then Ham. Ham is also very relevant, and we'll find out why. And then Japheth had the least relevance, so he's mentioned last, even though he's the firstborn. Shem means name. Ham means hot or warm. And then Japheth means open. Open. After all, he was the firstborn. He opened his mother's womb. So Japheth opened. Then Shem was born. Name, whatever name. And then Ham, hot or warm. This is the lineup of the sons of Adam. It's interesting how it mentions when this chapter starts off, it says, this is the book of the generations of Adam. It doesn't mention in this lineup Cain, because he is not in the likeness of Adam. You could be born, you could maybe even look like it, but you're not in my likeness. Today, if we're not born again, we are not in the likeness of God. Here is the full list here of this chapter. You have Adam, and he gave birth to Seth at 130, or his wife did, and then 800 years later, which equals 930 years. And so this is the lineup here. This is the lineup of the ages. Now, if you notice here with the ages, right, 930, and then it goes down 912, 905, 910, 895. It's somewhat going down. Jared, it goes up. Enoch, he didn't die, so that doesn't count. Methuselah was the highest. Lamech, well, that's a great number. That is by far the youngest death. By far the youngest death. Talk about mortality. It ends with this number representing rest, but it also ends with a number that showcases a lot of life. It mentions 500. We're going to see why 500 is mentioned later. But that death date of 777, that showcases that man is not living long. Now, when you do the calculations of this, and when you graph it out, and you see how long each person lived, you'll see that these people, it almost seems like, okay, Adam lived, then Seth lived, then Enoch lived, but Adam actually lived so long, he goes through multiple generations. Some people say, well, how can you have faith in the word? How can you have faith in creation? Well, Adam lived long enough not just to tell Seth, and then Seth told Enosh, and Enosh told Canaan. Adam lived long enough that he could tell generation after generation after generation after generation. He lived long enough to pass on the word. He could tell them firsthand about what Eden was like. In fact, when you look at Adam's life, he died during which person's lifetime? He died at the 56th year of Lamech. In other words, the dad of Noah knew Adam. No wonder that the next story marks a major chapter, because this is the first person to live in the line of Adam that didn't know Adam personally. But God speaks to that person. And so Noah will know God personally. It's interesting that God had Adam live long enough to tell the story of creation to all the generations, all the way to the dad of Noah. And so before Genesis was written, they just simply had the oral tradition. And you see how easy it is to have the oral tradition because you don't want... Noah doesn't have to take, Lamech doesn't have to take Methuselah's word for it. He doesn't have to take Enoch's word. This is not like the story was passed on for 900 years. No, I heard the story personally from the guy that was there. So they didn't need Genesis to be written because Adam was Genesis. He could tell the story personally. The oral tradition was easily fact-checked because it could be like, did that really happen? Let me go ask my great-great-great-great-grandfather, Adam. It was easy. And so it's interesting that after Adam dies, the person who was the last person to know Adam, he dies at the age of 777. And he names his son Rest. In this book, in this chapters today, we see how God had mercy upon his people. They didn't live like our age for like 70, 80 years. They were able to live long enough to pass on the story, but they died nonetheless. This is a story of death. Death. Cain killing Abel. That was a young death. Lamech killing someone, that was a young death. The youngest person to die of a natural cause was Lamech. He didn't even live as long as his own dad. What we see here is that death keeps catching up to us. But there is hope. There is the power, that's what Lamech means, the power of the number 7. Lamech means powerful. There's the power of the number 7. If the God of 7, and by the way, it's 777, it's 3. Remember when we covered in Revelation what 3 represents? 3 represents total dominance. God will give you rest and will have the total dominance and victory over your life. That's powerful. Even though death will call for all of us, whether through murder or death by old age or natural causes, while death will call for all of us, the power of God, the power of 7, is that God can give us real rest. He'll provide for us Noah. We can rest from our toils. Lord God, I want to thank you that you provide us rest. I pray that we will embrace you. We will not follow in the line of Cain, but you will give us a new meaning for our names, a new meaning for our Shem. Let us truly be in your likeness, according to your image. In the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for coming today. We've been doing Genesis beginnings. You've seen the origin stories. Next week, Saturday, is November 8th. We don't have a session here, but we have a session. We are going to be meeting here for the music day. It's going to be a wonderful thing that we're going to be having together. And then the following week, on November 15th, we'll be looking at the worldwide flood. Come back next week and the week after as we continue this series. Sorry, typo, worldwide flood. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm not hearing anything. Okay. Jocelyn? Jocelyn? Okay.